What if I told you that one of the greatest conflicts in the history of paleontology began with a fossil found entirely by accident, right in the middle of the American Wild West? It wasn't gold. It wasn't oil. What they found buried in the dry, silent desert was something far older, far more colossal, and much more dangerous than they realized at the time. In 1877, on the remote hills of Colorado, scientists were scouring the ground for clues from the past. And what did they find? It wasn't just a bone. It was what looked like an endless spine, belonging to a creature that had walked the earth millions of years before the first human ever existed. An animal so massive that, once discovered, it rewrote everything people thought they knew about the prehistoric world. But no one, absolutely no one, had any idea what that discovery would unleash. When the fragments of that giant reached the hands of paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh, he didn't just see a new dinosaur. He saw an opportunity, a weapon, a ticket to scientific immortality. And so the Diplodocus was born, a Jurassic colossus with a neck that defied logic and a long, flexible tail shaped by nature to slice through the air with precision, like it could shatter the forest's silence in a single sweeping motion. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it hadn't even begun. Because the arrival of the Diplodocus ignited a fierce rivalry that turned science into a full-on battlefield. Behind the digs and the pristine museum plaques, there was something far darker: fossil theft, sabotage, and an ego-driven race with no end in sight. And perhaps the strangest part of it all wasn't the size of the animal, or even the conflict itself. It was the people who were willing to go to any lengths for it. The story of the Diplodocus isn't just about a dinosaur. It's about how a colossal fossil, freshly pulled from the desert, became a weapon in a power struggle between two men willing to destroy each other just to have their names forever linked to the giant. Because this wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was the beginning of a war built on vanity, sabotage, and silence. And to this day, some say not everything that was uncovered back then has ever truly come to light. So, if you, like me, are already hooked by the start of this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand how a dinosaur with a brain the size of a piece of fruit still manages to stir up so much mystery. Let's get into it. If you thought wars only happened over territory, religion, or money, then you probably haven't heard about the one that was fought over a dinosaur. Because yes, there was a war of ego and ambition, fought not with weapons, but with excavations. And at its center wasn't an army. It was the Diplodocus. Shortly after this dinosaur's fossils were uncovered in 1877, everything changed in American paleontology. Othniel Charles Marsh, the scientist who named Diplodocus, knew exactly what he had discovered: one of the largest dinosaurs ever found at the time. Something powerful enough to secure his legacy forever. But someone else wasn't going to let that happen so easily. His name was Edward Drinker Cope, a brilliant, impulsive scientist and Marsh's sworn rival. When he learned that Marsh had claimed such an important fossil, the race was on. They started fighting over every dig site, every geological layer, every bone. Their war didn't use bullets, it used fossils. And the prize? Having their name attached to the most spectacular dinosaurs on Earth, especially the one that had just become the crown jewel, the Diplodocus. Marsh rushed his publications. Cope fired back with hastily written papers. One tried to sabotage the other's discoveries. Fossils were hidden, reburied, even destroyed. The Morrison Formation, where Diplodocus was found, became a battlefield of science. But why all this obsession with a single fossil? Because Diplodocus wasn't just big. It was strange. The skeleton was long, elegant, mysterious. Its neck defied biology. Its tail had a structure built for impact. It wasn't just another sauropod. It was the centerpiece, the fossil that could make or break a career. And that brings up a question that still echoes today. In this war of egos, was everything really brought to light? Was every piece of Diplodocus properly studied? Or were some lost, hidden, or even buried again on purpose? It may sound dramatic, but remember, these were men who destroyed full skeletons just to stop the other from getting them. And if they did that to other fossils, why not to Diplodocus? What else was buried out there in the desert, next to that endless neck that never made it to a museum? Maybe the answer is still out there. But the war this fossil caused? That was real. It's recorded in letters, in sabotage, and in a legacy where discovery and destruction walked hand in hand. And all of it happened because of him, the Diplodocus. Now try to imagine the world 150 million years ago. There were no continents like the ones we know today. No grass, no flowers, no birds singing in the morning, and definitely no humans walking around trying to make sense of it all. What existed back then was wild, primal, a planet covered in massive conifer forests, ferns as tall as telephone poles, murky lakes, endless swamps, and skies so heavy with clouds it looked like Earth itself was still learning how to breathe. This was the world of the late Jurassic. And in this world, the Diplodocus ruled. It moved slowly across what we now call North America, specifically through the region known as the Morrison Formation, a vast layer of sedimentary rock stretching across Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. But back then, that land was humid, hot, and stifling. The kind of place where everything seemed oversized: trees, insects, reptiles, and of course dinosaurs. Now picture this: you're surrounded by giants. The ground trembles under their feet. In the distance, a herd of Stegosaurus walks in silence, their plates glowing in the light of a Jurassic sunset. And then, like a shadow behind the trees, he appears, the Diplodocus, measuring nearly 90 feet long and weighing up to 30,000 pounds. This dinosaur was a living monument, heavier than a loaded cement truck, with a neck that stretched forever, and a tail that could cut through the air like a lightning bolt. But despite all that, it was calm, a gentle giant, a leaf eater, a colossal herbivore that moved with patience, reaching the tallest treetops, like the world was built just so it could brush the sky with its mouth. It lived among titans, side by side with Brachiosaurus, which stood taller and more upright, its neck raised high like a living tower, and with Apatosaurus, bulkier and stronger, a Jurassic bulldozer with a shorter neck and a thicker tail. But the Diplodocus had something unique, something poetic. His body was long, slim, and flexible, as if nature had drawn it with a ruler and a compass. While the other sauropods looked carved from stone, Diplodocus moved like water. It was built to travel far and eat efficiently, a body perfectly adapted for the enormous scale of the Jurassic. Beyond its visual elegance, its anatomy held secrets that still fascinate scientists today. The name Diplodocus comes from the Greek words diplo, meaning double, and dokos, meaning beam. That's because of a strange bony structure found underneath its tail, a kind of double beam that gave it extra support. Some paleontologists believe that tail wasn't just for balance. It could have been used like a whip, snapping through the air with enough force to create a loud, thunder-like crack. Maybe it was to scare off predators, maybe to communicate with others, or maybe it was part of a mating ritual. Its neck, made up of about 15 long vertebrae, was a natural feat of engineering. Unlike a giraffe's, it didn't rise upward. It stayed stretched out almost horizontally, allowing the Diplodocus to graze over a wide area without having to move much. A huge advantage when your body weighs more than 2 pickup trucks. Its head, though, was comically small. So small, in fact, that it could easily fit inside a school backpack. That tiny head held pencil-shaped teeth, all lined up only in the front of the mouth, just right for stripping leaves off ferns and conifer branches. And while the rest of the body was colossal, that head was fragile. Thin skull, weak bite, eyes placed on the sides, which meant poor depth perception. It wasn't built to fight, or to think too hard. It was built to walk and eat. Its nostrils were placed on top of the skull, and experts believe it had a strong sense of smell, which makes total sense. In a world where finding fresh plants could mean the difference between life and starvation, sniffing things out was practically a superpower. But the most surprising part? That little head also held an even smaller brain. Estimates suggest that the brain of a full-grown Diplodocus may have weighed less than an orange. Yes, an animal the size of a semi-truck, run by something smaller than a piece of fruit. Hard to believe, right? For a long time, scientists thought that meant it was just a walking instinct machine, like a prehistoric robot designed to eat and survive. But here's the question I want to ask you. How do you think a creature that big, with a brain that small, actually functioned? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was it all instinct? Or is there a missing piece of the puzzle we haven't figured out yet? And speaking of efficiency, there was another fascinating trait. Its vertebrae were hollow, much like those of modern birds. That made its skeleton far lighter than it looked. A crucial weight-saving design for supporting such a ridiculously long body. Its back legs were slightly longer than the front ones, creating an almost invisible downward slope. It was like the earth itself was nudging this animal forward, quietly but powerfully. Every part of its body, from the neck to the tail, from the hollow bones to the tiny brain, was built for one purpose: surviving in a world of giants. But even a giant like this didn't start out big. When a Diplodocus hatched, it was just over 3 feet long, in a world where nearly everything around it was bigger, faster, and deadlier. Researchers believe their mating rituals involved visual displays, tail snaps, or neck movements. Females would lay around 20 to 40 eggs at a time, buried in shallow pits, usually in moist areas to keep them warm and stable. After laying the eggs, the adults left. No parental care. Alone from day one, the hatchlings had to grow fast. Studies suggest a Diplodocus could reach half its adult size in just 10 years. That rapid growth was a matter of life or death. The bigger you got, the harder you were to kill. That's also why many scientists believe they lived in herds, not just for safety, but for survival efficiency. Moving in groups meant wider access to food, better awareness of predators, and a higher chance of making it through a dangerous world. And now you might be asking, how do we know this? Well, multiple Diplodocus fossils have been found close together. And some fossilized trackways show parallel footprints, suggesting seasonal migrations. These weren't random strolls. They were strategic movements, possibly over hundreds of miles, chasing food and better climates. This was coordinated survival. Dozens of massive animals moving together, leaving deep tracks in the ground, tracks that still tell their story millions of years later. The Diplodocus may have been massive, but it wasn't a loner. It was part of a species perfectly adapted to communal life, designed to survive a planet in constant chaos. And it wasn't alone. The skies were filled with pterosaurs, some with wingspans over 16 feet. The rivers swarmed with primitive fish, and were also home to giant crocodiles lurking just beneath the murky surface. But it was on land that the real danger walked. The Allosaurus was the apex predator of the time. Strong, aggressive, armed with serrated teeth and a crushing bite, it could grow over 26 feet long and attacked like a tank made of muscle and hunger. More agile and stealthy, the Ceratosaurus preferred ambush. With a distinct horn on its snout and a compact, muscular build, it would hide in dense vegetation and strike when its prey least expected it. And then there was the Torvosaurus, less famous outside paleontology but no less deadly. Its curved claws and strategic, calculated posture suggest it was built for ambush, the kind of predator that crept up slowly and ended things fast. These creatures rarely risked attacking an adult Diplodocus. That would be like charging an armored bus. But the young, juveniles, they were vulnerable. A young Diplodocus might already be 30 to 50 feet long, but without the mass, without a tail strong enough to defend itself, it was just a promise of a giant. And in that world, promises didn't live long. But the danger didn't come only from claws and teeth. The environment itself was lethal. Landslides, triggered by intense seasonal rains, could bury whole animals in seconds. Lightning storms were common in the dense Jurassic atmosphere. They ignited forest fires within minutes, and with highly flammable ferns and towering conifers, the fire spread like it was alive. Even the ground was treacherous. Swampy paths seemed safe but were deceptive. One wrong step, and the enormous weight of a Diplodocus was enough to drag it into a deadly sinkhole. And if none of that worked, all it took was a slip. One awkward stumble with a long, fragile-boned body could lead to fractures, and in a creature weighing over 30,000 pounds, that was usually fatal. 15 tons doesn't forgive mistakes. Yet out of all the dangers, there was one that was slower, quieter, and far more cruel. Hunger. When tree canopies dried up or shifted out of reach, competition among herbivores surged. Diplodocus, with its daily need for hundreds of pounds of leaves, lived under the constant pressure of an invisible countdown. If the forest failed, it had no options. Hunger didn't growl, it didn't chase, simply waited and killed from within. That harsh world, that ancient jungle, shaped every part of the Diplodocus. It wasn't big by accident. It had to be big, to reach food others couldn't, to intimidate predators, to resist the climate, to survive in a world where death could hide behind every shadow. So where exactly was this world? At the time, the continents didn't exist as we know them. What is now North America was part of the supercontinent Laurasia, which shared the planet with its southern twin, Gondwana. The Morrison Formation, where Diplodocus fossils have been found, sat along the western edge of Laurasia. It was a geologically active region, filled with flooded plains, shifting rivers, and tropical forests. A perfect cradle for giants. The world was in constant motion, and the Jurassic was its wildest, most intense chapter. But perhaps the most astonishing part is this. All of it happened before the Rocky Mountains even existed, before feathered dinosaurs evolved, before the continents broke apart and drifted across the globe. The world that Diplodocus lived in is a world that quite literally no longer exists. And that's why, when you look at a fossil like this, you're not just looking at the bones of a creature. You're looking at a fragment of a lost planet, a fossilized slice of time, a world where size was essential, because death lurked in every shadow. And even though that world disappeared millions of years ago, the story of Diplodocus didn't vanish with it. Because centuries later, this giant would rise again. Not in the jungle, but under the bright lights of the world's greatest museums. Time passed, millions of years buried, then over a century tucked away in the back rooms of science. But eventually, Diplodocus came back to life, and this time not as a jungle beast from the Jurassic, but as a museum superstar. It was at the start of the 20th century that this prehistoric colossus experienced its second birth. And it all began with one man, Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, one of the richest men in the world, driven by a passion for science and for prestige. When he heard about a dinosaur so enormous, with a name that sounded almost magical, Carnegie decided he wanted one for his museum. In 1899, he funded one of the largest paleontological expeditions of the time. The result was stunning. One of the most complete Diplodocus skeleton replicas ever assembled. Nicknamed Dippy, the skeleton was installed at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, and it didn't take long for it to capture the world's attention. Kings, presidents, scientists, and ambassadors began visiting the museum just to see the Jurassic monster, rebuilt bone by bone, standing tall. It wasn't just an exhibit. It was a symbol, a monument to science, to American power, and to Earth's ancient past. But Carnegie didn't stop there. He ordered perfect replicas of Dippy to be sent to the world's top museums. London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Buenos Aires, St. Petersburg. In just a few years, Diplodocus became the world's first global dinosaur, a kind of Jurassic ambassador, representing the prehistoric world in the grand halls and palaces of modern science. And with that, a fascinating paradox was born. An animal that lived over 150 million years ago, extinct before birds even existed, became an icon of scientific modernity. It appeared on posters, in books, in newspapers. Dippy became the most famous dinosaur the world had ever seen, without people truly knowing just how important he was. And so, the giant that once dragged its tail through swampy, dangerous lands, now traveled the globe by ship, packed in wooden crates, destined for the great cultural centers of humanity. Diplodocus had gone from the depths of the earth straight to the center of attention. But was that really the end of the story? Because even though it's been celebrated in museums, studied in universities, and photographed from every possible angle, Diplodocus still holds secrets. And maybe the greatest mysteries lie in the parts that were never put on display. Diplodocus has already been forgotten in the desert. It's been at the center of a scientific war. It's been taken apart, packed up, and shipped across the world. But even after all that, even after the books, the movies, the museums, and the research, the truth is we still don't know everything about it. Not even close. Scientists still wonder whether that massive tail really made a sound like a sonic whip, or if it was just a balancing tool. No one knows exactly how this giant slept. Did it lie down or sleep standing up? Did it shift its weight from leg to leg? With 30,000 pounds on its back, one wrong nap could have been fatal. And what about the brain? It was tiny, possibly even smaller than a dog's. Which raises another question. How could such a complex body be controlled by something so limited? Was it driven purely by instinct? Or was there some kind of collective intelligence within the herd, a survival system based on group behavior? And then comes the most delicate question of all. Have we really found everything there is to find? During the Bone Wars, fossils were hidden, swapped, even destroyed. Could parts of Diplodocus have been reburied? Could something have been discovered and simply never revealed? Some records from that time are incomplete. Others contradict each other. There's evidence that unlisted fragments were once transported and then vanished. What were they? Where did they go? Who saw them? Maybe we'll never know. Diplodocus may have lived 150 million years ago, but its mystery is still alive. Because in the end, it isn't just a fossil. It's a question, buried in time, still waiting for an answer. And since that question is still alive, how about helping us share this story? Leave a like, drop a comment about what impressed you the most about this small-brain giant, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep digging up stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.